Married couple Maria and Ingvar live in an isolated sheep farm in Iceland, but their quiet existence is unsettled by a new arrival, Ada, a half-lamb, half-human child. Lamb kicks off with a long POV shot from the perspective of some intruder who isn't identified for a large amount of the movie's runtime, who works his way into the sheep pen and, impregnates a sheep. Wow, that's a weird start to this review. Now, that opening shot is really striking, and it also shows the positives and negatives of this movie in a kind of microcosm. It's this long, single, unbroken take. It starts off with a fully white screen. It's in the middle of a snowstorm, and then slowly these black shapes resolve in the distance, which is a bunch of scared horses. And then we see in the sequence, all these worried sheep, and we don't see the attacker here. So that means that we get this really slow building of tension in this gorgeous but very barren landscape, and then that tension kind of goes nowhere and does nothing. And that's basically what watching the whole movie is like. So if you want a sense of it, you can see it in the first 5 minutes. Maria, Noomi Rapace, is a well-observed version of like a quiet character. And you get the sense that she's not just quiet because that's her nature, but instead that she's withdrawn. She certainly seems to have an issue communicating with her husband, and it becomes clear quite quickly that there's something going on in their past that neither of them wants to talk about, which unfolds over the course of the movie. Now, pretty sharpish Ada comes into the story, although we actually don't see that she's this hybrid creature until quite a bit further on in the movie, which is a bit of a shame because, of course, the marketing has largely revolved around that. And why wouldn't you? It's like the most striking image in the movie by far. Just unfortunately, it's kind of treated as a twist in the actual text of the film, which doesn't really make sense considering that, well, it's in every shot of publicity for the movie. The couple immediately decide to take her in and name her, and it kind of is this unspoken thing. It ties into this central theme that runs throughout the movie about denial and kind of the dangers that come with it. This idea that some things should be left unspoken, and other things, if we don't discuss them or talk about what's wrong with them, then they might fester and become much more problematic. Now, if you watch the trailer for this movie, you're probably expecting it to be a horror, and internationally it's distributed by A24. In the UK, it's distributed by Mubi. Now, A24 has a kind of background in what we might call arthouse horrors or elevated horrors, if you like that term, which I don't. Mostly because it's kind of snooty, and I think it implies that all horror is pretty bad except the ones that critics happen to like. And certainly that A24 trailer implies that this movie is going to be some kind of horror narrative. You have this child who's kind of like a hybrid, a bit freaky looking, and then you have the threat of whoever her father is, basically. Now, in reality, and I know that the filmmakers don't really have much say in marketing, so I'm not saying it's their fault, the movie is actually much more of a family drama. And Ada, far from being this horrific figure who's kind of portrayed in the trailers, is actually like very sweet and arguably one of the nicest things in the movie. Once they've decided to take in Ada, they get a cot from the shed, and then you realise that the thing that's going on between these two people is the loss of a child. That they had some kid at some point. It's not clear, I don't think, really how far along they were in that, either that pregnancy or in that child's life. But they're using this kid, this kind of unnatural, like hybrid child, as a replacement for that human child. And obviously bad things will come of that. And then about halfway through, Ingvar's brother shows up, who's kind of rebellious, and immediately is like taken aback by this animal/child that has come into his brother's life. And he also seems to have some kind of past romantic relationship with Maria as well. Now, like I said, it's not the filmmaker's fault that it was marketed as a horror, but I have to say I think a horror version of this would be more interesting than the movie that we end up with. Ultimately, if you're being observant, if you notice stuff like the cot coming out of the shed, you're pretty clear on what's going on between Maria and Ingvar straight off the bat. I'm talking maybe 30 minutes into this 2-hour film, and then it just kind of carries on as if that's going to be a twist, which eventually is kind of revealed as. And likewise, this relationship between Maria and Ingvar's brother, Petter, doesn't really go anywhere. It's not really part of the plot in any sense, although it does take up quite a lot of runtime of the movie. And yeah, I just found myself wishing that it had a bit of genre oomph behind it. I don't have a problem with slow movies. I mean, if you've watched the channel, you'll know I actually really enjoy quite a slow movie sometimes. But I want there to be something behind that. I want that to be part of how that story's told. And here, it just feels like almost like padding. Like there isn't really much of a story being told behind that slow stuff. And all those things you might get out of having the frame run on for a while longer, like noticing the power shift between people and the blocking and the conversations they have, doesn't really happen here because there isn't that depth of character, fundamentally. We don't really find out much about them. And it's not just the visual pacing that's slow, but the pacing of the storytelling as well. I was pretty astonished to find that the last 30 minutes of this movie contained 10 minutes about watching a football game and then getting drunk. None of which really ties into the plot at all, but is kind of portrayed in its entirety. Now, whether that's a specific cultural Icelandic thing that I'm just missing out on, I don't know. But what I can say as an audience member is that for me, when the movie should have been speeding up, it started to slow down even more. Now, I should say that the craft of the movie is really good. It's beautiful, all of the performances are on point, and I think the effects work, although it's limited and quite low budget, is really effectively used. But I just get this feeling that all of that is in search of a movie to hang itself on and doesn't find one. You know, the most interesting thing about this by far is its premise, and once you've seen that on screen in the first couple of minutes, the shock wears away and there isn't really much else to say, which is a shame, you know, because I'm always looking for a distinctive horror experience or something kind of art housey that takes on some of those genre tropes, or just something distinctive from a national cinema you don't see much of. And this movie pretty much falls short on all of those accounts. That's it from me, but as ever, I'd love to have a chat with you about this movie in the comments below. Have a good one, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.